Welcome everyone, Fruits of the Orchard. Today we have two parshas. Remember, when it's not a leap year, then there are many parshas that are doubled in order to be able to get through the whole cycle. So we have two parshas, Behar and Bechukotai. And as we see, in the end, they're very connected. So we're going to start with Behar, and we're actually going to start with an understanding from Orchard of Delights. That's, of course, the first in the series. Fruits of the Orchard is second. And there's a very important understanding of Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and why it's connected to Behar Sinai. In other words, the classic question that is always asked is, the introduction to this parsha is that God speaks to Moshe, Behar Sinai, at the mountain of Sinai. And then virtually the entire parsha is involved with just one set of mitzvot. Not one mitzvah, but the set of mitzvot around Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and Yovel, the Jubilee year. The entire parsha. There's only one other parsha that's even close to this idea that a whole parsha is taken up with just one matter, and that is Tazria. Tazria is a few parshas ago in the book of Vayikra, Leviticus, and it deals with the skin ailment called tzara'at. And there again, you have virtually the whole parsha having to do with this one set of mitzvah, even though there already the first mitzvah has to do with Brit Milah, with circumcision, and the ritual that a woman who gives birth would go through at the time of the temple. So really, this parsha is unique in that the whole parsha deals with one set of mitzvah. So the question that is asked, well, all of the mitzvah were given at Har Sinai. Why does this parsha have to mention specifically that God spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai and gave over all of these mitzvot? That's the classic question that's always asked. So Rashi gives us the pshat. What we're going to do is we're going to go through Pardes. We're going to go through the pshat, the literal meaning, the straightforward meaning, the remez, the hinted to meaning, the drasha, the allegorical, symbolic, metaphorical meaning, and the sod, the more mystical understanding. So Rashi gives us the pshat, the simple, straightforward, and he says, why does it mention here at Har Sinai? As I said, the question is, if all the mitzvah were given at Har Sinai. So he answers by saying that this parsha gives over not only the general mitzvot of the sabbatical year, but many of the details and even the details of the details. And so he says that's why it says Behar Sinai, because this is how all of the mitzvot were given over to Moshe. It's just that what is written in the Torah doesn't include the oral Torah. So in other words, there's many mitzvot in the Torah that we learn about them in one verse, two verses. And then sometimes in the Talmud, you could have a whole tractate based on just 1, 2, 3 verses about a certain mitzvah. And the details are not given over in the written Torah. That comes in the oral Torah. But in this parsha, it goes into great depth and great detail. So that's what Rashi says. Rashi says that's the reason that it says at Mount Sinai, because that's how all the mitzvot were given. So that's what's called the pshat. So what is the alluded to connection between Shemitah and Har Sinai? Because we could ask another question. Theoretically, any of the other mitzvot that have great detail but are not written in the Torah, God could have chosen those mitzvot to give a whole parsha for. So even though we answered according to Rashi, it doesn't completely answer it, because we still have the question, but why was it Shemitah? Why was it the sabbatical year that is chosen to give over the general idea and all of the details? So that we get from the remez, the drush, and the sod. So the remez is, and this is a very, very strong connection, is the Torah was given Behar Sinai as the end of a process. And that process is what we're going through now in Sfirat HaOmer, where we count 7 times 7 weeks. And then the 50th day is Shavuot, the giving of the Torah. So we have a paradigm, a model, 7 times 7. Those are the weeks of counting the Omer, and then the 50th day is Shavuos. Well, that is the exact same model of Shemitah. We work for 6 years and then we rest on the 7th. But then we count 7 times 7 Shemitah years, and the 50th is the Jubilee year. So here, now we can understand why this parsha begins that God spoke to Moshe at Har Sinai, because the model of Shemitah and Yovel, the sabbatical year and the Jubilee year, mirrors exactly the 7 times 7 weeks of the Omer, and the 50th day being Shavuot. So that's on the level of what we call remez. It's an allusion, a hint to why Shemitah was the mitzvah chosen to be given over in all of its great details and its general principles, Behar Sinai. Now we could come up with 2 levels of drasha, of a more symbolic and allegorical, metaphorical understanding of the connection of Har Sinai and Shemitah. And one of them is the unity that is present in both of these things. How do we see that? When we come to Har Sinai, it says, V'yichan Sham Yisrael neged Har, that Israel camped across from the mountain. This is in preparation for receiving the Torah. And there Rashi points out that the word camped, Vayichan, is written in the singular, even though it's talking about all of Israel. We would expect it to be written in the plural. So he explains in a very well-quoted Rashi that we camped there ki'ish echad b'lev echad, like one person with one heart. And it's explained that this, in great measure, was the prerequisite for being able to receive the Torah. That Israel arrived at Mount Sinai and camped there as one person with one heart. There was a total unity there. And when we look at the Shemitah, there's a very similar unity that is the goal of Shemitah. And that is because in the Torah, there's a very, very different concept of ownership of land. And so during Shemitah, the sabbatical year, all the produce in Israel becomes what's called ownerless. And despite the fact that someone might have a plot of land of hundreds and hundreds of acres, and it's super productive, and it's their livelihood, during sabbatical year, all of that produce becomes ownerless. And people don't do buying and selling in the same way. And in theory, any of the produce can be picked by anyone. So this creates an incredible breaking down of borders between people. And then, of course, in the Yovel year, there is an idea that all land reverts to the original owners. In the, let's say, the Western concept of ownership, once a plot of land is sold, it's sold forever. But not so at the time of the Torah, because there was a very, very strong emphasis on keeping tribal lands together. And so if someone sold their tribal land, in essence, it really was only for 49 years. And in the 50th year, it reverts back to the original owner. So therefore, selling land was more like leasing land. So that, again, that creates a type of evenness in society. So this is a more allegorical understanding of the connection between Har Sinai and Shemitah, the idea of unity. And not only that, but because farmers at that time, and Israel was an agrarian society, then everyone had, as it were, a year off. So what did everyone do? What was one of the goals? Is that people would learn Torah. And there would be a unity of purpose in the country as to what everyone is supposed to be occupying themselves with. Of course, all kinds of other work could be done. But since it was mostly an agrarian society, it also brought people together. A second type of understanding is what's the connection between Har Sinai and Shemitah, is the idea of faith, emunah. When we were about to receive the Torah, we said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do, and then we will hear. Meaning, God, we don't know what's going to be in your Torah, but we trust that whatever you're going to give us, we will do. And even if we don't understand quite yet, we're still committing to doing it. Well, that takes a lot of faith to commit to something that you don't even know what you're committing to. You just have total faith that this is a good deal. This will be good for us. The same thing with Shemitah, that to rest the land for an entire year took an enormous amount of faith on the part of an individual who lived in that kind of society. It's not like today, where if you run out of some vegetables, you just go to the store. You run out of fruit, you go to the store. And in stores around the world, there's actually produce from many, many, many different countries. You could go into a store in a place where there's snow in the winter, and you could get all kinds of summer fruits that are shipped in within 24 to 48 hours from their source. Well, it wasn't like that then. So if you run out of food, you have to provide for yourself. So preparing for the Shemitah is like preparing for Shabbat. That people would spend the whole year before making sure they had enough food stored and available and pickled and dried and preserved so that they would have food during the year. But this took an enormous amount of faith. And we're going to see in the second portion, when we get to it, that all of Israel actually never kept completely a whole Shemitah year, because it took such a high level of faith on the part of everyone that it never actually happened, even though obviously many people did keep Shemitah, just like now many people keep Shemitah, in the old days even more, but still it was such a challenge to people's faith. Not everyone rose to the occasion. So again, we see a connection between Har Sinai, the kind of faith that we needed to receive the Torah, and the kind of faith that it takes and it took to keep the sabbatical year. And then on the level of Sod, the level of the mystical understanding was that Shemitah is called a Shabbat. It's a Shabbat for the land, it's a Shabbat for God, and it's Shabbat for the people who are observing it. And we know that there's an expression that everyone agrees that the Torah was given on Shabbat. So the giving of the Torah is very connected to Shabbat. And keeping the Shemitah year is like an extended Shabbat. And so just like on a regular Shabbat, we have the opportunity to feel the peace of mind, spiritual bliss of the Shabbat atmosphere, the ambiance of Shabbat, the spiritual and mystical ambiance of Shabbat. So too during the Shemitah year. But it's not like it ends after 24 hours, that this type of peace of mind that could be accessed on a regular Shabbat could also be accessed during a Shemitah year. And if you remember that when the Torah was given, and we're getting close to Shavuot, we're told that the seven heavens opened up and that people could see the sounds, that all of the senses merged, and it was a total mystical experience. Every Shabbat also has the same opportunity to experience that kind of openness, that the worlds open up, the spiritual worlds are accessible to us. And so too during Shemitah, there is that possibility that when the land is resting, and we're resting from working the land, that it opens up all of these new doorways and gates of experience. So this all was to explain the connection of why this parsha is called Behar, at the mountain. So as I said, this comes from Orchard of Delights. Anyone who has Orchard of Delights can see this Torah. It's the second Torah in Orchard of Delights. So now let's revert back to Fruits of the Orchard. And because it's a double parsha, and there's many articles in both parshas, we will not be able to get to everything. So I'm going to go through as much as we can. And since we mentioned the idea that the Torah is given on Shabbat, And the Shemitah is an extended Shabbat. It's a Shabbat for God, for the land, and for the people. So we're going to look at the first Torah called a mountain of light. Excuse me. And what we see is that the gematria for the word Behar in the mountain is the same as light, 207. And that's why this article is called a mountain of light. So there's some deep connection between Behar, Sinai, in the mountain of Sinai, and light. So here, a more simple idea is, we know that there was a tremendous, once in a history revelation of God's energy and light and presence as God spoke really only the first 2 commandments of the 10, because it was such a awesome experience, people actually couldn't bear it, couldn't handle it. And they went to Moshe and say, you talk to God and you'll relate to us what God said. But the idea that God's light was so revealed, and we're told that there was a fire on the mountain and smoke. It was the idea of the modern songs, Fire on the Mountain, is really from Har Sinai. This was the original fire on the mountain. So there's a deep connection between light and Har Sinai. But here it's just Behar, in the mountain. So this is a Torah we've repeated many times, but this is a different context, is the reverse numerical order of light. 207 is 702, which is Shabbat. And so here, now we have a connection of Har Sinai, Shabbat, and light. And we know that we usher in Shabbat, especially women, have the great merit to light the candles of Shabbat, to bring in the Shabbat, and to bring in the infinite light into the finite worlds that we live in. And this secret is that the gematria for light, 207, is the same as the word in Hebrew for infinite. The Ein Sof is also 207. So here at Har Sinai, God was revealing infinite light in the letters of the Torah. It's a general idea that the finite black letters of the Torah are channels of infinite light that are shining through them. And that's what's called in the Zohar, in the mystic tradition, that God revealed and wrote the Torah black fire on white fire. The black fire are the letters. The white fire is the parchment behind the letters. That's what's called black fire on white fire. But to go just a little bit deeper, it's been revealed by modern science that matter is energy. That even though matter, like a mountain, may appear static, unmoving, but the inner world of matter is pure energy, frenetic movement. And that's why Einstein revealed in E equals mc squared that you can take just a little bit of matter and you can turn it into atomic energy. It just takes a little matter if you can extract the incredible energy within the matter, you get atomic energy. So it's the same thing in our tradition between physical and spiritual, that all physical matter, all physical reality is hiding a brimming world of spirituality. This is the secret behind all of the mitzvot. All of the mitzvot are taking physical objects, physical actions, speech, and revealing the inner spiritual essence of the physical world. And so that's hinted to in Behar, in the mountain, being the same gematria as light, or. And we see a very similar thing with the menorah in the temple. The menorah in the temple was lit by olive oil. And on the surface, olive oil is a liquid. And so usually you can't light liquids. You can't light water. You can't light orange juice. But olive oil you can. And so this is actually the secret that we're speaking about, that from the olive oil comes light, that it's hidden within the olive oil is the possibility of light. There's actually, I'm just thinking of this, a famous story of one of the sages, Hanina ben Dosa. And he was known that many miraculous things would happen around him and through him. And so one time, right before Shabbat, his daughter put vinegar in their lamps that they were going to light. And it was just like right before you had to light, there wasn't time to take the vinegar out and clean the vessel and then put in olive oil and then put in the wicks. So she came to her father like, what are we going to do? And he answered, he said, the same God who can make olive oil burn can make vinegar burn. And so they lit the candles and there was light. So this is a story in the Talmud. But what it's teaching us is that within all matter, and that's the mystical idea here, that in the mountain, that in the essence of matter, in the essence of the mountain is light, is the teeming world of energy. And that energy is coming from the light of God. In our world, how do we get energy? All energy. Well, it's all being animated by the creative spark, the light of God. And now that we're talking about mystical connections, so that's the next article in Fruits of the Orchard is called A Mystical Relationship. And here we'll just say in short that the Shemitah is a Shabbat. And the Torah is given on Shabbat. And our relationship to the Torah and Shavuot is compared to a divine wedding, where the symbolic Chatan, the groom, is none other than God, and the bride is Israel, and the wedding contract is the Torah. That is the ketubah. And so the Zohar actually says that the 7 weeks of counting the Omer before Shavuot can be compared to a prospective bride who counts what are called 7 clean days. And then she goes to the mikvah right before the wedding in order to be able to consummate the wedding in a state of purity. Most men also go to the mikvah. And in fact, our tradition is when we receive the Torah, everyone cleanse themselves in a mikvah. So Shavuot is called a divine wedding. And in relationship to Shemitah, our relationship to the land of Israel, and it's called the Holy Land, is we are the groom and the land is our bride. And during the Shemitah year, which is called the Shabbat, we treat the land with tremendous respect and love, and we become aware of our deep attachment. It's like a divine wedding, that the Shemitah year emphasizes our great attachment. And just like a wedding in Hebrew, the ritual, the wedding ceremony is called kiddushin, from the word kadosh, holy. And of course, we always refer to the land of Israel as the Holy Land, Eretz HaKodesh. And it's because of our relationship with the land that we are bound in a covenantal connection to the land. And God gave us the land and made a covenant that this land will always be the land of Am Yisrael, of the Jewish people. And so there's a soul connection. We are soulmates with the land of Israel. So this is a very, very deep understanding of what Shemitah helps us realize, that this relationship that we have with the land is one of great holiness and great respect and great love. Now, the next article in Behar, there's 2 stories in here, 2 great stories. And the article is called Just Do It. And this is based on a Rashi. In Vayikra, chapter 25, verses 8 through 10, in Leviticus 25, 8 and 10, there are a number of verses, of course, about the Shemitah year and the Jubilee year. And Rashi learns from the juxtaposition of how the verses are termed that even if Am Yisrael, or even if a person didn't keep the Shemitah years, then you might think, well, then what's the point of keeping the Yovel year? And Rashi corrects that and says, even if a person does not keep the Shemitah year, and if Am Yisrael doesn't keep the Shemitah year, we should keep the Yovel year. So all of the mitzvot apply to each and every person. So what can we learn from this? So I found this story. Some of you might have what's called the Carlebach Haggadah. This story comes from the Carlebach Haggadah. It's just such a great story. So the story is, Reb Shlomo once was in Waco, Texas. Waco, Texas, because of events that happened, I don't remember, 20, 30 years ago, stick in people's mind is like a place of disaster. But there's actually a mikvah and a Jewish community in Waco. One time, Reb Shlomo found himself in Waco, Texas, and he went to the mikveh. And when he was either in the mikveh or coming out or going in, he sees a very, very tall, big man coming with a cowboy hat and boots on, and he had chains on, and he's coming to the mikveh. And Reb Shlomo's curiosity was like, what is this person coming to the mikveh for? So he introduced himself, and he asked, if you don't mind me asking, why are you coming to the mikveh? So the man answered, he says, the truth is, I usually don't go to the mikveh, but today I had this tremendous urge to come to the mikveh. And I'll tell you why. He said, I'm from Vitebsk, a place of a very, very famous dynasty of Rebbes. And my family was coming to America, was emigrating to America from Vitebsk. And the Shabbat before we left, my father took me to the Rebbe of Vitebsk. And there were many people. I was 5 years old, and there were many, many, many people there. And in fact, there were so many people, my father was concerned that I would get lost in the shuffle. So he put me under the table right below the Vitebsk Rebbe. And the Vitebsk Rebbe gave over a Torah at the meal. And he said, sometimes our evil inclination comes to us and says, let's get honest here. You don't keep mitzvot all the time. So now all of a sudden you're going to do a mitzvah? Like, let's be true here. Either you keep the mitzvahs or you don't keep the mitzvahs. And even if you're keeping the mitzvahs, if you're not doing them with great kavanah, who are you fooling? So the Vitebsk Rebbe says, don't listen to this voice. If you get an urge to do a mitzvah, don't say to yourself, well, I'm a bit of a hypocrite. I don't usually keep Shabbat. All of a sudden, I feel like I want to do something for Shabbat. He said, don't listen to that voice. And when he finished, he took his hand and he reached under the table and he put it on my head. And he said, did you hear what I said? Don't ever forget it. So this is a story this man told to Reb Shlomo. And he said, I'll tell you the truth. Like I said, I usually don't come to the mikveh. Sometimes I do something for Shabbat. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I fast on Yom Kippur. Sometimes I don't. But today I woke up and I had this urge. I need to go to the mikveh. And I remember what the Vitebsk Rebbe told everyone and me. That's why I'm here. So this is such a deep, deep story for all of us. And so now I'm going to tell a second story. I don't know if this story is true or it was made up to make a point. But even if it was made up, when you hear the story, you'll hear how real it is. And it could 100% be true, 100%. So the story is that a man is at work with his co-workers, and he's Jewish. So he invites one of his co-workers that he's pretty friendly with to join him Friday night at his shul and to come for his house for a meal. And he says, my shul is just, people are so friendly, and there's beautiful prayers, and my wife is an incredible cook, and you'll love the experience. And so the man says, no, thank you. Okay. A couple weeks later, he invites him again. And again, the man says politely, no, thank you. And so he wants to invite him a third time. But this time he says, listen, I want to invite you again, but can you tell me why you keep refusing me? So the man said like this. He said, I'll tell you the truth. If I go to you for a Shabbat meal, I'm probably going to enjoy it. If I enjoy it, then I'm going to say to myself, well, why don't you do this every week if you enjoyed it so much? And then I'll feel obligated to go to shul every Friday night. And I'll feel obligated to either make my own Shabbat meal or get invited. And if I do that, then I'm going to say to myself, what? You only go to shul on Shabbos? What kind of consistency is that? And then I'm going to feel obligated to go every day. And if I start eating kosher food, I'm going to start feeling what, once a week you eat kosher food and everything else is not kosher. And so then I'm going to feel I'm going to have to kosher my house. And that's why I'm not going to come to you for Shabbos. So like I said, I don't know if this actually happened, but most certainly many people think like that. And sometimes all of us think a little bit like that. I'm going to take on myself a new custom. I'm going to start learning a little bit more than I usually learn, and I'm going to love it. So why am I not learning more all the time? And if I do a mitzvah in a certain way with great zeal and great awakening, so what's going to happen? I just looking at the chats, Kaya Rivka says, this is exactly what happened when I invited my neighbor. Like I said, this is it's like a real thing. So these two stories really go together. And I'll add one more thing that I wrote here is about what's called twice a year Jews. This is an expression that is used for people who join synagogues and actually pay quite a bit of money to have a membership. And they show up twice a year, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Sometimes they'll go when there's like a bar mitzvah of a friend of theirs, they'll feel obligated to go. But basically, they go twice a year. And so it's become a bit of a term of derision, like people who are so minimally connected, they only go to shul twice a year. So I heard from Reb Shlomo a tremendous explanation of this, very, very profound. He said this can be compared to parents and children. And the example is a parent has a child who moved far away from home. And even though there's telephones, there's emails, now we have FaceTime, the whole thing, WhatsApp. But this child doesn't call all that often. But once or twice a year, they do make the effort to come and visit. And so during a good part of the year, the parents kind of feel a little bit rejected, a little bit sad that their child is not in more contact. But when the child finally comes, that they're able to put all that to the side, and they're just, oh, Baruch Hashem, I have a day, a week, 2 weeks with my child. So Reb Shlomo said it's really the same thing with God. That you could think that God like really looks down on a twice a year Jew. He says, but really, God, who is like a parent, Avinu Shebashamayim, our Father in heaven, that, yeah, maybe there is a little bit of disappointment that his children aren't keeping the Torah the way we could or should. But when we do, then, like a parent, God is so happy to see us. So this changes the energy completely. Instead of a twice a year Jew being a term of derision, it can be seen also in a very positive light. At least they're making an effort to come twice a year. It's that meaningful to them, and they're willing to pay a lot of money for the membership so they can get their seats for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So that has a value also. So all of these stories in the article called Just Do It, they're very applicable, and they're very, very real. Okay, with the time that we have left, I want to do the second parsha. As we mentioned in the beginning, this is a double parsha, and the second one is Bechukotai. Bechukotai has in it what's called the first of what's called the blessing and the curse. This is repeated many times in the Torah. In this parsha, there are 49 so-called curses. In Parsha Ki Tavo, in the book of Devarim, there's exactly double. There's 98 curses. But each time, it's preceded by a series of blessings. And then in the rest of the book of Devarim, and throughout all of the great prophets of Israel, the same paradigm is used over and over and over again. That God sets before us a measure for measure reality. And it's very simple. If you listen to my voice, and if you keep the Torah, you'll have all of these blessings. And if you don't, then all of these curses will come upon you. This is talking about the whole Am. We have the paradoxical, enigmatic reality of a righteous person that suffers and a not so good person who prospers. This, of course, is one of the greatest mysteries of life. And even Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is in the tractate of Berachot. I believe it's around page 5. There's a whole discussion where Moshe asked God, why do the righteous suffer and the not so good people prosper? And the Gemara goes into very deep and profound discussions. But the bottom line is, only God knows. That's the bottom line. So here, when we're talking about the blessing and the curse, it's more a communal, and our right to be in Eretz Yisrael is totally dependent on our doing the right thing. So this is Parshat Bechukotai, and the connection, not just that they're happen to be two parshas next to each other, but there's a deep juxtaposition because a number of times in this parsha, there's something that's added that's not added in other places where the same blessing and curse paradigm is repeated. And that is that if we walk or act contrary to God, and we treat God as kind of like the back of our hand, that we will be paid back 7 times for our indiscretion. And it mentions it a number of times. And later in the parsha, it gives a reason. And it's a brief explanation, but it's quoted in all of our tradition. Because you didn't keep the Shemitah year, you didn't keep the sabbatical year, which is based on 7 times 7, then the measure for measure will be the 7-fold negative energy that will come to you. And in fact, we're told that the 70 years that we were in Babylonia was a direct measure for measure for the 70 Shemitahs that we didn't keep. And this was given over by Jeremiah and our oral tradition, but it's already fairly explicit in Parshat Bechukotai. And we say it every day in the Shema. In the second passage of the Shema, every day we say that God says, if you'll follow the commandments and you will do as you're supposed to, and especially you make a just society, you will live on the land in peace and in prosperity. And if you don't, then God will shut up the heavens and there'll be no rain, and you will not be able to maintain yourself on the land. The land will not allow you to stay on it. And this is a theme that runs through all of the prophets, that our ability and our merit to be in Eretz Yisrael ultimately depends on us keeping the Torah. And this is true to this day. And that's why, in a deep way, there's nothing guaranteed right now about our ability to stay on the land. Even though we certainly act and hope like that, but we should know enough from Jewish history that there's nothing guaranteed. We need, as a people, to fulfill our obligations to be able to merit to Eretz Yisrael. But now I just want to address one other thing. It's of crucial importance to understand. When you read this parsha, and we read 49 curses, and then we read the 98 curses in Parshat Ki Tavo, the language is extremely harsh, is very vivid. And when you go through the prophets, also along with all of the promises of redemption and beautiful imagery of the Messianic era and a time of peace and harmony in the world, some of the predictions of what will happen if we don't act accordingly are shockingly harsh. And so we need to understand this, because there is definitely a feeling in the world that when you read the Bible in English with no oral tradition and no understanding of really what it's saying at all, but especially this kind of harsh language, so many people draw the conclusion that God is an angry, jealous, vindictive deity. And the truth is, if you read it in English with no context, you may get that idea. And so we need to understand, well, what's going on here? Why this harsh language? So I'm going to bring a Rashi from just 2 parshas ago, Achrei Mot. Yeah, 2 weeks ago, Achrei Mot. And it begins that God spoke to Moshe after the death of the 2 sons of Aaron. When they came close, they approached God and they died. And then the parsha launches into the laws and the understanding of Yom Kippur. So everyone asked the question, why does the parsha has to start with after the death of the 2 children of Aaron? So there is a deep connection, which we're not going to go into now, but it's one of the deepest understandings, even though the sages point out many, many possibilities of what the 2 sons of Aaron did wrong. And the Torah itself describes what they did wrong a number of times. One is that they brought what's called a strange fire. And one is that they brought an offering that was not commanded. But the sages add many, many other possible reasons of what they could have done wrong to have deserved to die. Well, what did they do exactly? They were not commanded, but they took incense and they took coals from the altar and they put the incense on the altar and they went into the Holy of Holies. And they were not commanded to do it. And the Torah calls it was a strange fire. And they died in the process. But nonetheless, after it happened, so Moshe said to Aaron, I knew that the tabernacle, the Mishkan, this happened at the dedication of the Mishkan. I knew that the Mishkan would be dedicated through those who are close to God. And I thought that meant you or me. But enigmatically, Moshe says, now I understand that Nadav and Avihu are even greater than us. So this is a whole mystery. I'll invite everyone to go to Orchard of Delights and Fruits of the Orchard to read more about this. But I'm just pointing it out because there is a connection between the death of the 2 sons of Aaron, because what did the high priest do in the temple on Yom Kippur, like the pinnacle moment, is exactly what Nadav and Avihu did. And that's why it's so mysterious. He takes incense and he takes coals from the altar and he goes into the Holy of Holies. So we would think this should be the last thing the Kohen Gadol does on Yom Kippur. This is exactly what Nadav and Avihu did. But that's part of the mystery, is on a certain level, there's something very great that they did. Nonetheless, it was an offering that was not commanded, and they died in the process. That's an aside, because the question was, why does the parsha have to begin with the death of the 2 sons of Aaron? But Rashi says an amazing thing. He brings a parable, and he says it's like a person who goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, in order for you to get well, you can't eat radishes and you can't be in a cold environment. That's it. And then he says, but there's another man who comes, and the doctor says the same thing. For you to get better, you can't eat radishes and you can't be in a cold place. But he adds, if you do, you might die. That's what Rashi says. In other words, why does the parsha begin with the death of the two sons of Aaron? Is to warn the high priest to take the service of Yom Kippur, which is now going to be explained in that parsha, and to take it really, really seriously, because if not, you might die. And if you take the two people went to the doctor, who is more apt to listen to the words of the doctor? The first person who's just told don't eat radishes and don't be in a cold place, or the second person who's told the same thing but says, and if you do, you might die? So obviously the second person. So why am I bringing this? Is a lot of the harsh language in the Torah is for the same reason. We're human beings, and like sometimes, let's say parents tell their children, please don't put your hand in fire. Don't put your hand in fire. Well, what's the difference if a parent says to a child, don't put your hand in fire. If you do, you're going to get really hurt. It's like very painful. Well, who is the child going to listen to the first thing the parents say when they say, please don't put your hand in fire? It's not even going to register. But if a child is told, this is really serious, don't ever put your hand in fire. Or if a parent sees their child running out to the street, a busy street, they run after them and they grab them and says, oh, it's not a good thing to do. Is it going to register to the child the next time? Or if the parent has to maybe even like grab the child and yell at them, but it's for the child's good. It could save their life. So I'm bringing these examples because this is a bit how we have to understand the harsh language in the Torah. Is that God is trying to make it really clear to us the effects and the consequences of our actions. And the point I'm about to make is absolutely crucial, is the blessings and the curses. It is just like the physical laws of the universe, just like there are physical laws of the universe that, except for rare occasions when God supersedes a physical law, which we will call then a miracle, the laws of nature work like clockwork, and it's a good thing. But there are spiritual laws that also work like clockwork. God can't supersede them, but basically the spiritual laws work in the same way. And this is what's called cause and effect, action and opposite reaction, consequences for our action, and a measure for measure. And so the Torah over and over again, when it expresses God's anger, it's like a parent who's getting angry at their child because they're acting totally out of line, totally inappropriate. And if the child doesn't learn, they're going to go through life with 3 strikes against them because they weren't taught proper boundaries, proper context, red lines. And so, it, specifically in this week's Parsha, but it really runs through the entire Tanakh, that this harsh language it's a warning. But remember, all of the curses are preceded by blessings. And none of the curses have to happen. They don't have to happen, and they're not supposed to happen. But they're expressed in a very harsh way, because if they happen, they will be very harsh. And so when you read this Parsha and the other warnings of the prophets in the book of Deuteronomy, unfortunately, all of them came true. You look at this Parsha and you read it, and it's like reading Jewish history. It all came true. But what God is trying to say, and sometimes by expressing in very harsh terms the consequences of our actions, like, don't get yourself in that situation. Don't put your hand in the fire. Don't run out into the street. Because if you do, there are consequences. And I'm warning you that these are laws of the universe. That's how reality works. So this is just a crucial understanding of a lot of the language in the Torah that naturally, even someone who has tremendous faith, it's jarring, this kind of language. So we have to understand, and especially someone who doesn't have a certain amount of faith and doesn't understand what the Torah is about at all, it's so easy to misinterpret God's intention and the Torah's intention by using this kind of language. So I hope that was clear. It's a very, very important point for all of us. So I'll just end with a blessing that we never know these curses, not in our private life, not in our communal life. And we could only do the right thing and connect ourselves to all of the blessings that God wants to give us.